Okay, good morning everyone. My name is Parris and I'm a Director of Products in the IoT device group at Arm. So many of you have probably heard of Arm. So we provide intellectual property that gets licensed to our silicon partners, and those silicon partners build SoCs, build microchips basically that go into end devices. So sometimes it's surprising actually a lot of people haven't heard of Arm because ultimately the consumer is very far away from those silicon providers. So today I was going to talk a bit about some of the technology and some of the architectures that Arm is promoting to help security. So Hayden mentioned a few times before the platform security architecture. And actually it's very interesting how a lot of the motivations behind this link very well with the opinions you heard this morning about the need to increase trust in IoT and then the need to basically improve the foundation of base security on all devices. So talking a bit about where we're at and where we're coming from, fundamentally there's a huge amount of innovation happening right now, a huge amount of inventions. IoT, you saw some of the charts this morning, the hockey stick of growth on IoT devices in smart cities across many different applications is growing phenomenally. Arm has over 1,000 partners, including the silicon partners and tools vendors and OEMs. There's a huge partnership working with Arm to provide new technology services and products. But one of the challenges is security. I mean, another IoT definition could be insecurity of things. Honestly, there's some people might say cybersecurity today is a mess. There's so many devices out there, and if cost is that minimum factor for some people, they might cut down on the security capabilities they place in that device. So really, there's a need to act now to improve security across all connected devices. So Arm's been talking about this as a digital social contract. The idea that we're all responsible, everyone in this room really, between the silicon partners, the OEMs, the buyers, anyone in the industry who wants to get more internet-connected technology, we all have that social contract to make sure that security is part of that definition. And so one thing we released just a few weeks back was the Security Manifesto. So on the Arm website, you can go download this. It talks through a number of examples of how we need to think about security. And so I'd highly recommend you go have a look at that. And so an important part of that social contract really is building the trust in the consumers and any real customer of the IoT device and IoT service. Because any security hack or breach fundamentally erodes trust in the end user. So again, that social contract being an important part of that foundation. And so really what this says is that security can't be optional in IoT. Every IoT device has to think about it. Even a simple thing like a light bulb. Certainly, I'm sure you'd agree that something like a smart door lock, absolutely don't want someone just running some kind of hacking app and breaking into your house. Everything really that connects to the web needs to think about security as a key foundation. And so to do that, really that design of security has to be there right from the start. It has to be architected into the hardware and the software. It can't be an afterthought. It can't be patched and band-aided later. Really, anyone designing a product or an SoC or anything has to think about how do we make sure that's secure right from the start. Now the good news is, Arm and our partners, we've been looking at security for many years. Going back to 2000, we launched the Secure Core products. So this is an ARM processor which has protection against side channel attacks. So it's the kind of processor you need in a smart card, for example. So today, your banking card, your near-field communications banking card, etc., your SIM card in your mobile phone, there's a very secure core in there which fundamentally protects your identity and your assets and stops people hacking your bank account in many ways. So Arm's had this for many years and shipped billions of units of that technology. More recently, so in 2005, we launched TrustZone as a technology on our applications processors. So Cortex-A is our application processor family. So I'm sure everyone in here with a mobile phone it's highly likely you have an ARM processor in there, and that has trust zone technology, which is protecting your assets. Maybe it's protecting DRM for content you download. Maybe it's protecting your internet banking. It'll be doing a number of security services and protecting key assets inside your mobile device. So again, very widely used today. Pretty much every ARM applications processor has that trust zone technology today, and it's used in many different applications. Next, the Trusted Execution Environment, or TEE, is really a standard for how that software runs on a trust zone system. So it describes the properties and the relationships between the secure world and the non-secure world inside the SoC. And this is something that's been standardized by global platforms, and again, very widely available, very widely used. So you might hear of technologies, in terms of consumer devices, say for example a Samsung phone, you might have heard of the NOC security. This all builds on top of TEE and the trust zone technology. More recently still, so 2015, we launched a number of new technologies. So the Mbed is an operating system from ARM, so Mbed OS. Free and open source operating system, and there's an Mbed Cloud component of that as well, which provides all the things that Hayden was talking about: device management, device onboarding, and so on, to provide secure updates, etc. CryptoCell is secure technology to accelerate cryptography functions and to secure keys and assets inside the device. And Crypto Island is the latest in that family, which really builds a full secure subsystem in the SoC, and we'll talk more about that as we go through. And also importantly, with the latest Cortex-M series, so the microcontroller family for ARM, we also now introduce Trust Zone into those embedded devices. So while Trust Zone has had a long and rich history in applications processors, we see the need for security in the very small embedded IoT devices as well, and that's why the Trust Zone security has now found a home there as well. And also just a few weeks back at the ARM TechCon, we launched the platform security architecture, which is really, again, trying to build up that foundation of security across all devices. So as we think about how IoT scales, we saw some numbers earlier today. This is just the number of ARM processors shipped. So over the last 26 years, 100 billion ARM processors by our silicon partners. And we expect in the next 4 years, there'll be another 100 billion units of ARM devices. And a huge proportion of these are those very small embedded microcontrollers. So again, going back to all the things said this morning, with such a growth in IoT devices, security has to be part of that foundation, rather than trying to patch it later. And so, as we look, across all the different markets and verticals, all the different applications for IoT, there's really a common need for security across all these devices. The ability to have security there from birth, and the ability to manage those devices and update those devices. Now, of course, as I mentioned earlier on, ARM is providing IP, so intellectual property, like a processor design or a CryptoCell, crypto IP, and we license that to our silicon partners, and they then deliver that onto OEMs, and there could be tens of or hundreds of silicon partners and thousands of OEMs out there building devices for the IoT. And so there's a challenge then of, well, actually so there's a lot of diversity there, which is great. Our silicon partners can add their own special features and provide something that's different to the other providers. But ultimately, how do we manage security when we've got so much diversity across all of these different suppliers? There's really a need for some level of kind of common framework to help this whole ecosystem with this secure base. So this is really what triggered the platform security architecture. So the idea is that we have a lot of silicon partners out there who want to improve their security, but maybe don't know actually what's the right target. Security is not black and white. There's a question earlier this morning about, is it secure or non-secure, or is there actually a spectrum of security? And the reality is there's a whole spectrum there. So depending on what kind of assets you're trying to protect might dictate how much security protection you put into that device. So in terms of PSA then, or platform security architecture, there's three key parts. Firstly, we analyze a number of different devices, example devices like a smart meter, like an IP camera, like an asset tracking, and we look at what are the threat models, what are the security threats that we're trying to protect against, and we analyze what techniques would we need to protect against those hacks. We architect then, so by delivering documentation like software architecture and hardware requirements, we can then provide what we think are the key building blocks for that secure solution. And then also to help establish this, we're also developing open source software. So there's firmware called the trusted firmware for these Cortex-M devices, which basically implements that software framework. We'll go into more detail on each of these as we go through. There's also 4 guiding principles we think are kind of the key part of a secure IoT device. So having that device identity, which is probably unique to that device, instead of having one AES key for every smart meter, I think was the example this morning, having each device with its own unique identity. And Hayden talked this morning about how to program those devices in the manufacturer line. For example, the Data I/O hardware. That device identity is programmed into that device and is unique into that device, so that when the cloud is talking to that device, they know exactly where that device was made, where it came from, that it is who it says it is, and it's not some counterfeit or a clone device, for example, or some hacker. Trusted boot sequence, again, this has been mentioned a few times, the ability to have a root of trust right from the very start, from when you first turn on that device, being able to trust that there's a certain foundation within the device where the keys are stored, for example, and where any new software applications which are loaded, they are tested against that trusted root of trust. Number 3, the secure over-the-air update. Again, as you'd expect, devices ultimately will be hacked at some point if people try hard enough. So the ability to be able to provide updates to protect against those vulnerabilities is really a must for any IoT device. And finally, certificate-based authentication. Again, the ability to protect any communication with that device, and again, to know that if the cloud is talking to a given device, we know who that device is and it's not being compromised in any way. So these are kind of key principles that are outlined in the platform security architecture. As I mentioned, there's a number of hardware and software architecture specifications which can be applied to these devices. So going through an example then of that analysis. So we might start with a system description. What is the device? What are its assets? So what are we trying to protect? What kind of threats might it be subject to? Making sure, for example, if it's a smart door lock, we're trying to protect against some kind of hacker app, but we're probably not trying to protect against a sledgehammer. That's maybe kind of out of scope of the IoT connectivity part. And then, what are the security objectives would come from this? So, for example, the need to provide cryptographic storage for assets, for example. And so that ultimately, leads us on to the requirements. So the example of a smart meter, the asset there is, metering of data, and we don't want people to steal their electricity or water by, programming that meter to show a different number. So really, we're protecting against those remote software attacks, and the security objective then may be secure cryptography of the data, of the measurement, for example, inside that device, and certainly securing the connectivity to the cloud as well. And so in terms of the deliverables then, with the platform security architecture, so these will be freely available on the ARM website later in Q1 next year, and we're being delivered to a number of lead partners right now. So those security analysis, as I mentioned, a smart meter, asset tracker, connected camera. So 3 very high quality kind of worked examples of here's how we analyze those threats. These are the kind of security techniques we should be applying. There's the firmware specifications, so the example software and capabilities for things like secure updates and secure boot sequence, and a number of recommended hardware requirements. Things like true random number generation, secure storage, crypto acceleration. These are kind of foundation parts of a secure device. And again, by ARM kind of delivering this documentation, we can help all of our silicon partners and OEMs with that kind of base knowledge. So I mentioned the open source software, so the trusted firmware for Cortex-M. Again, this is a free open source piece of software we'll be delivering as well to help with that effort. So go into a little bit more detail of what does the platform security architecture define. Really at the first level, it's talking about isolation. So on the right-hand side here, we have a picture showing we might have applications running on RTOS, a real-time operating system. But we'll have a number of trusted functions. For example, anything managing the keys would be, we want to isolate them and run them in a secure processing element or environment. And that's basically managed by a secure partition manager. And ultimately, this is all running on some platform hardware, which again will have certain properties. So if we think about TrustZone as an example of implementation, TrustZone would provide that separation between the non-secure world and the secure processing environment. And by making that secure processing environment very small, we reduce the attack surface. We make it easier to test the security and protection of that piece of software. And ultimately, this is all running alongside or in conjunction with secure boot and that secure root of trust for the key management. So really, the goal of platform security architecture is helping secure those very small, low-cost IoT devices where the full trusted execution environment may be too large. So it's about protecting those assets, so that secure processing environment and the hardware underneath it, which has an understanding of secure storage, allows us to protect those assets from the application code. And ultimately, as Hayden mentioned as well, also PSA, all the documentation we're delivering is very much architecture neutral. We're architecting it first for the Cortex-M devices, so the deeply embedded devices, but it could absolutely scale to any of the Cortex architectures or even beyond the ARM architecture as well. So a little bit more detail on what the specification is actually defining then really is going into the level of covering a number of interfaces between those different environments. So for example, if we look at the gray boxes now on that chart, defining a secure inter-process communication, the ability to communicate between those applications and the trusted functions, defining a way to the secure partition API, so again, linking the trusted functions and the secure partition manager, and also defining the secure hardware requirements, so that, again, what features are expected in the hardware to help enable this. So by ARM defining these standard interfaces and APIs, really it helps a whole partnership of software developers, hardware developers, OEMs have a common language over which they can communicate about the security features and how they protect that data or those assets in the device. Now, of course, ARM is providing some example implementations, but certainly partners are free to provide alternatives here. Really, we're trying to enable the ecosystem with a good reference, a good foundation, but certainly it doesn't stop that differentiation as well if that's what partners want to do. So going into the examples then of what ARM is building, a couple of things I mentioned earlier. So the ARM Mbed OS, for example, in yellow here, would be an example of the RTOS, the real-time operating system. Again, this is free, open source, available from ARM. The trusted firmware M is implementing that secure partition manager function. And the TBSA, or trusted based system architecture, is defining that common hardware features inside the SoC. So there's a whole load of work here that ARM is doing to provide a lot of example security IP to again, like I say, kind of help that help with building up the capabilities of security. So if we look then, what happens before, after PSA? Today we have devices. I was in Korea just recently talking to some partners there, and they mentioned that just recently the smart meters that have been installed right across the country, there's a security vulnerability there, and they can be hacked. So there's a program over the next few years to replace all the smart meters in Korea, for example. So like I say, security, this is a real problem today. Insecure smart meters. We heard about the Mirai botnet attack earlier. So smart cameras with default passwords that can be easily hacked and compromised, and causing issues there. And ultimately, if there are devices out there that haven't got the update capabilities, at some point they may be hacked, they probably will be hacked. If you haven't got the update capability, then certainly the consumer trust is going to be lost. So after PSA, we would hope that with our silicon partners and OEMs all improving that foundation of security, that security is then designed in right from the start instead of being an afterthought. Devices have that secure certificate-based authentication instead of a default password, and those updates, of course, are again designed in and architected into the device right from the start. Now, I do want to talk just a little bit about some of the other components that ARM has that kind of all feed into these secure IoT devices. So certainly we've talked a lot about the platform security architecture today, but if we look at this in terms of a system context and what you might see inside of an SoC, there's a number of components here. For example, the trust zone processor, features like having secure debug to connect to that processor. So for example, that means protecting against someone just plugging in a wire into the SoC and taking out those assets. You really need to design in these capabilities to protect those assets from the physical attacks. We also deliver a number of secure system building blocks that connect up the SoC. So interconnect is really all the on-chip wiring that connects processors and memories and so on. And ARM is also actually delivering example systems as well. So actually delivering all these building blocks already wired together, again, to kind of help partners with a good starting point. Of course, low power is very important for IoT, especially battery-operated things. So again, having low power architected in from the start. And as I mentioned earlier on, a new product is the Crypto Island, this idea of having a secure enclave on the SoC, which has its own processor in there and its own secure memory, secure storage, and is managing all that kind of key management and asset management. And then finally, of course, connectivity as well. So for example, connecting to the cloud, potentially over narrowband IoT, which is kind of the latest kind of low power cellular connectivity. So ARM really, as well as I mentioned, all the platform security architecture work, of course, we have many products that help our silicon partners build these secure systems. So to close then, so really the goal of platform security architecture is to really help shift the economics of security. Whereas before, security, like say, maybe thought of as an expensive option, really we need to change that to be, well, there must be security in there, and the more we can do to provide that as a default and an expectation that there are key pieces that have to be in there, the more we can secure the IoT. So really devices have to be born secure. We can't think of security as that option. And ARM is really architecting this, not just the device side, but thinking about this end-to-end from device to cloud. By providing the platform security architecture for free, the aim is that we can help reduce the cost and help increase scale of IoT devices. Okay, any questions?
People clapping.
Oh, sorry.